All right, happy afternoon, or happy afternoon, happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So, for anyone that's new, my name's Tony Dubiel, and I work for Red Hat, and I'm a product solutions architect out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm focused on Ansible and primarily network automation. And today's topic is digital twins for networking. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but most of this is really just to give some folks some insights to one of the options of kind of delivering on lab environments in a way that is that lends itself to infrastructure as code, to being able to manage your environments through best practices such as GitOps repositories, using Ansible to deploy environments ultimately into like a virtualized lab environment. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's not really going to, the conversation is really not going to take us into like, how to use digital twins to model like your entire network infrastructure and those types of things. Those are more of like the point products that specialize in that. It's more around, building lab environments that you can use for, introducing, different methodologies for, testing your infrastructure as code deployments. So we'll take a look at a couple of examples of what I was doing, and I'm kind of early on in this environment I put together, so I don't have a lot of things to share. I just have an EVPN environment that I put together using Cisco Virtual Catalyst 9KVs, and then I also have an Arista environment, so kind of you can see how easy it is to spin up like different vendor environments and stuff like that. So before we get too far in it, some of you may not be familiar with digital twin, and again, I'm kind of using more in the context of building a lab environment, but you can still look at it through the lens of digital twin, because one of the things about digital twin technology is a way of making it easy to take those production configurations and then reproduce those in an environment that's safe to work in, so that way in a particular staging environment or test dev environment, you can go through your own test-driven methodologies and work through issues, right? That would help solve problems in production, but also things where you're trying to vet out changes that you're ultimately going to incorporate into your production networks. So the official definition of digital twin is, again, a virtual model of a physical network. So we're definitely doing that, but really the scope is kind of different. So the intention is really to span the network's lifecycle by staging a replica of the configuration state from the production network. So there's different systems, again, that are more like platforms that offer sort of like, in a way, like almost like a DVR of your infrastructure, where it takes like samplings, in particular configuration, in terms of, providing you with snapshots, right? So that way you can effectively like replay, different flows of traffic and things of that nature. This is more around, again, like for my purposes, is more around, testing configurations and those types of things in a very easy to use environment that would lend itself to infrastructure as code, net DevOps, GitOps, all the buzzwords, right? But being able to deliver that, and primarily delivering it in a containerized way. So that's sort of kind of the premise of this is, how can I build an easy to stand up environment? And although like I'm doing this kind of in a way where everything is, open source, and I'm building it on a virtual machine that is running RHEL, right? Because RHEL is one of the requirements for me to install the AAP, which is the Ansible automation platform. But I didn't go a step further and kind of take it more into like the proprietary realm of like running all this on OpenShift, or even, Kubernetes. I'm just kind of keeping it simple at this point. So what I'm doing is you can either run this using Podman or using Docker, and it's very easy to get started. And a lot of it is around Containerlab. So that's kind of like the premise of building the environment and being able to provide a data plane, between virtualized network appliances. It's super easy if we're just building the ones that already have container images. But the reality of that is there's not a lot of those available. So some vendors do have, routers and switches, firewalls that do have that container image. So it's a fairly small form factor, super easy to spin up, like even on your laptop environment. But that doesn't include, an exhaustive list of like all the other, particular images that we could actually use that are like QCal images, as an example, and being able to convert those into container images. So that's what I did in this environment. Is I wanted to have one that had the Catalyst 9Ks from Cisco. So I went through like a very easy procedure to be able to convert one of those images into a wrapper, so that way I can use it in Containerlab. And we'll talk a bit like how to do that. And I'm going to run through in my environment and show you some of these things in action. But because it takes a bit of time to spin things up, we'll probably start the workflow and then go into different areas, and then we'll circle back into the actual workflow as it completes. And then you'll see some of these things working live, or hopefully working live, right? So this is a Halloween special, so we don't know what kind of spooky things might happen to my lab environment. So I'm praying that the demo gods are still looking out for me. So what is this lab environment? So the cool thing about this is that it's all deployed in one server. So again, I needed to use RHEL. So that's why I have RHEL here. But I mean, certainly, if you were doing this like aside from AAP, that's just a requirement, for my Ansible automation platform to run correctly. And I decided to use 2.5, and I'm using the containerized install of our latest release, which is 2.5. And that does have an option to deploy that on a single server. So that's one part of it. So I have, a handful of containers that are running as part of the automation platform. And then I've also installed Containerlab. So that gives me the ability to spin up, topologies in this same environment. And it's all self-contained. So I really don't have to worry about messing with Nginx like on the front end to be able to access these containers that represent the lab environment. Because it's all contained on the same host, then they already have access, to that container network, and it's very straightforward and very easy. But you could do that. You could like externally connect to these, but you have to then start to configure Nginx and some of the other capabilities that allow you to proxy those ports and and expose them externally to your environment. Or if we did have OpenShift or Kubernetes, then we would use that paradigm as well. So I'm keeping it, very simple. And then what I did have to do, and I mentioned it earlier, is I needed to, and that should say QCal there. So that's a typo. A QCal image. What I'm doing is I had to convert it so it would work in this environment. And a couple other things that I wanted to do is I can certainly use like a Git repository that is either installed somewhere in my infrastructure with like an enterprise edition type of thing, or publicly in GitHub or GitLab type of thing. But what I did is I just went ahead and incorporated Git, and Git is just a containerized Git repository that's free, that's very easy to set up in a lab environment, and it gives you access to all the same capabilities. So you can create multiple branches in your environment. You can merge them, all the things that you would typically do in like GitHub or GitLab, to build like GitOps types of capabilities into your workflow. You can certainly do that. The VS Code is really like a preference for me, from an IDE perspective. But it does have some neat capabilities, so I normally lean towards that, especially like in this whole Ansible paradigm, because like our AI, Lightspeed has a extension, right, that you can enable, right, these extensions in your VS Code environment. So like there's a lot of pluggable things you can do with Ansible. There's Lint and other tools that are very easy to spin up there. But one of the reasons why I also like it too is that I could either use my VS Code that's running on my laptop, and then I can remotely access this VM that has all these other container components installed on it through SSH. Or what I did in this case is I'm just using this one deployment option of VS Code where you can run the code server, and you can run that as a container. Or if you want it to be super easy, and that's what I just did to do this one like simple and easy is I'm just running it locally on that server, and the the one drawback with that one, even though it's super simple to set up, is that I'm doing like an SSH tunnel to it on certain ports that I exposed. So I'm just going through that to get to the VS Code instead of just leaving it open. And the reason why I did that is I also have one of these on AWS, and I didn't want to expose that, like have someone. I just didn't want to have that open, that port, to my VS Code server. So I just did it locally, and then I piped that through an SSH tunnel. But you can run it in exposed ports. And again, like in this environment too, just two things to keep in mind is like if you want to, depending on how you want to set that up, if you just want to expose a port or if you actually want to like proxy, through like a name, you can mess with your Nginx capabilities. And then also the firewall. So firewall D is enabled on the RHEL for the AAP, as a best practice. So just remember the ports that you're opening for any of these other tools, you'll need to expose them too if you want to hit them off box. But everything that's contained on this box, keeping it local, it can already connect to each other. So it's not an issue in that regard. The graph is just a Python library or actually Python application that allows us to take the dot files that we can create in Containerlab, and then we can create PNGs or what's the other one, SVG types of files, so that we can see like a topology diagram of the lab infrastructure that we're building. And then obviously in order to do any of this stuff, you either need to use Podman or Docker. It just depends, what your preference is there. So they both work, effectively the same way. So that's all the components and parts to this. Now, here's where there's some specific links. And if you're new to this meetup, what I normally do is if you go to the meetup page for this event, after it's over, you can go back to a past event. And what I do is always provide like a PDF of the slides or like a link to like a repo if I have a repo ready for you guys, or any of those artifacts from the meetup. You can go and it takes me a little bit of time because I also have to wait for like the recording to render from the Google Meets. But probably like later today or tomorrow morning, I'll have all that stuff on there, so you can go back and you'll have access to all these links. But I want to walk through some of these links to show you some of the things that maybe not so much gotchas, but just things that might not have been as intuitive that I kind of ran into setting up all this stuff, to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the breadcrumbs that I noted, just to kind of help you if you want to recreate the same type of environment. So since that's going to take a little bit of time to walk through, what I want to do is take you into my lab environment that's running. And we'll kick off some of the workflow so that it can run while we're doing other stuff. So it is. And if you're not familiar with what you're seeing here, this is the Ansible automation platform, and it is 2.5, so it looks a little bit different for those who haven't seen it before. If you're more familiar with 2.4 or one of the earlier releases, we had individual UIs for each of the components of AAP. So now we have a unified UI. So you'll notice that it says automation execution. So that represents most of what used to be in the automation controller GUI. But there's a couple of sections. So you have this section, and then some of the controller stuff was a bit further down here for like access management, where you set up like your roles-based access and some of those bits. So it's those two sections would effectively equal what you would have seen in like the older GUI. And what's new is we have EDA, the event-driven Ansible, so it has a section. And then we have the private automation hub. So there's a section here where you can store your execution environments and also any of the collections that you're creating that you want to keep, in your own private environment, as opposed to like publishing them, out in Galaxy. If whatever you want to keep private, you can store that here. You can even pull in the Galaxy ones and sign them, like you could vet them further, or the certified collections, when you pull them in from our automation hub that's on the public site, when you pull them in off of our console.redhat.com, then you can store them locally too. So it's just there more for you to have like a single point for all of your content. And what else we have? Lightspeed is for the AI. So if you want like an assistance with code assistance with building playbooks And then moving into the future, it'll actually build like job templates and workflows and like all the other constructs of AAP. It'll be there as an assistant, so you can set it up here, and then you'll use it along with your VS Code. So that was like one of those extensions I mentioned where it'll allow you to like, from the prompt, you can say, whatever type of requirements are for your playbook, and it'll put one together. But it's a little bit different than ChatGPT because this, this model is internal, so it's all based off of like best practices from like our business unit and consulting and stuff like that. So that's pretty much just a real quick Cliff Notes view of what's in this unified UI. But what we care about here is what was the automation controller, which still is the automation controller, but it's section of the UI, and what was Tower, right? So if you go way back, if you're more familiar with that, that kind of all arrives here. And the thing that we care about is templates, where we can run playbooks or workflows. So this right here is a workflow that I ran earlier, and this actually builds the lab environment. So I'm going to run it again so that we can see it in action, and hopefully it succeeds. Like you can see this one, everything worked. And what it's going to do is it's going to deploy a lab environment. It needs to reboot the Catalyst 9Ks because when they spin up out of the box, you have to license them and give them capabilities from that. So we want to be able to do EVPNs. So we need like this advanced licensing to one enabled, but then we have to reboot it so that it's actually active. And then afterwards, we want to push configurations. So these would represent like configurations that we could have pulled like off of our production environment, or if we're in like a staging, maybe we had, or we're in test dev and we pull them down from staging, or whatever the case may be, we would typically have like a repo of like backups of the configs, and then we can apply them, to the devices by, running Containerlab in a certain way that can read in configurations. So instead of using command lines for that, we can take advantage of just, creating this workflow and running playbooks. And then lastly, like once it's all put together, we'll actually have an inventory that will actually work from those devices that are spun up and they're configured. And then I'm just running a very simple playbook just to gather facts so that we can read in just the default facts for like, show ver level of information. And then I also included like the BGP resource module facts or the network facts, so we can see that BGP is configured because it's an EVPN. So each one of those devices in that topology, they have BGP enabled for the overlay and the underlay in this particular example. So we'll see those configs come back, and then we'll know that it's fully configured at that point. And then another thing I want to show you is I mentioned you can build like these topology diagrams, once you build your lab, and we'll do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and relaunch this, since I'm kind of taking a lot of time talking as well. And you'll see that it creates a job for the workflow, and then it creates individual jobs for the playbooks. So this first playbook is deploying a lab environment. So this is going to take a little bit of time. Like you see that it just built a topology. So there's 2 leaves and 1 spine, and it has assigned it IP addressing. But what we're going to do is we have to wait because it's not ready for us yet. It's just like the initial part of building the lab. So while that's going forward, let me pop back into here. And I wanted to take you through Containerlab. So this is the landing site. And this is an open source tool. It was started by Nokia. So they're still like one of the main contributors. And it's open to all vendors. So I like it, the multi-vendor type of thing, and it works the exact same way. It's just a matter of the images that you're using may be different depending if they're already natively containers or if you're needing to convert to, from a VM to a container image for a particular image. So these are the container ones that are out there. There's not a whole lot of them. The benefit of them is that they spin up very fast, right? So they have a smaller form factor. They spin up a lot quicker. So there's less services and things. So so those are kind of preferred if you want to run like on your laptop, especially because it's not going to consume as much to build like a decent topology. But the challenge with that is that there's a lot of things that you may want to do that are not included here. So there's a ton of other ones from the various vendors. So I was on this one right here, the Catalyst 9000V. And there's a bunch of them in here. There's actually another link. So this is just like explaining it at a high level. If you go into kinds, then they have it sorted through like all the different vendors. And you'll notice that it's not just routers and switches. You can also do firewalls and load balancers and things like that. Like here's a Palo Alto firewall. And each one of them gives you like an example of the configuration that you need to prepare for them to work, and also what you need to do to be able to convert the image. So to convert the image, there's this other component, the VRNet Lab. So if you go to their GitHub and then you clone it down, they have folders for all these different solutions. And basically what you do is you'll take your QCal2 image and you'll copy it into these folders that you've cloned into your environment. And then you'll run a make command and it'll go through these scripts and it will convert that VM into a container image that you can use with Docker or with Podman. And then also with the Containerlab, orchestrating that as well. So that's effectively what that is. And I can show you on my server, what it looked like. And also we can look at the image from Docker so you can see it that way as well. So that part's pretty straightforward. Some of the other things, there's the ability, so I'm running a single server. So I gave it like a decent amount of RAM, 128 gigs of RAM, and I think like 20 virtual CPUs that I allocated for it. But you can go way beyond that, right? Because you can do multi-node deployments of this, and it will allow like a EVPN tunnel between them. So you can build it out a lot bigger that way. So I think that's further down in, not an installation, but, or maybe it is an installation further down. There's a multi-node. Or maybe it's not on. It's in here somewhere. Just search for it. Yeah, multi-node labs. That was easy enough. Right, so it shows different ways that you can set up multi-node environments too. So again, it's still like a lot is on you, right, to create like the orchestration that you want. So this is not like a manual process. And again, like there's purpose-built tools out there that have GUIs that do some of these things that make it a lot easier. But this one is cool. Like if you do want something that's like more open source and container friendly, or you're moving in that direction, and potentially like you can get this to work on other platforms as well. So that's kind of like through the lens that I'm looking through with this. And it's, to me, it just seems like a neat way of doing that and getting started. So some of the other things is if you want to run Containerlab and then you want the AAP 2.5, this is the documentation to run the container installation. Now, if you're not a customer, you can still get this to work, because you can use a 60-day eval license, or you can go and get yourself a developer's license, and that'll allow you to have, I think, 20 endpoints. And that one is more of it's a permanent license. So like the rel that you'll need and all the, licensing for the AAP for the 20 node lab type of thing, you can do that. I don't have that link on here. I meant to put that. I have it on some of my other slides. So what I'll do is I'll add those links. So that way, if you want to sign up with a developer account, you can do that as well. And, then you would be able to stand up the same thing. Everything else is all open source stuff. So there's no need for licensing or anything like that. So there's that. And then you could certainly get some of this to work with just Ansible core engine too, but you wouldn't be able to orchestrate everything as easy with workflows and all that kind of stuff. So let me just take you in here just to give you an idea about the install, just to make sure you understand. So this is the containerized install, not the regular VM one or OpenShift operator or any of that kind of stuff. So the containerized install just requires you to have Podman. And also, I think you have to have Ansible core engine installed too, so you can run the Playbook, the installation on Playbook. And then it's very straightforward and easy. And one of the things too, just as a reminder, is there's a couple different inventory files. You want the one that says inventory growth, -growth, because that is for a single VM install of these containers. and it already has like an inventory file that you just have to make a couple of changes to it to like define like what's the host name for your VM, and then like some passwords that you want to use, and then it builds it like very easy. It just takes a little bit of time. It takes about like 25-30 minutes to build it out. But once they're there, then it's just, containers that are, starting and stopping as you reboot the server, and the Nginx stuff automatically comes up from the platform component. And so it's really really easy to get started and to operate it. It's not a big deal at all. So that's pretty much the background stuff. So let's see where we are now in my workflow. All right, so hopefully we're getting towards the end of this. Let's see what it says. All right, so we've gotten past like the reboot one. This one is pushing configs. So we're actually getting towards the end. So while that's running there, let me click in here so you can see this is the actual output from a job. So this first one was deploying the lab. So all this really was automating, what we would have done from running the actual commands. So the output from that is the lab environment. It actually, one thing that's new too is you can look at it in YAML now or JSON. It used to just be JSON. And most of the time YAML is great. Like if it's like a config file or something like that, it's going to be a lot more human readable as YAML. But for a lot of the standard output looking types of things like this, it'll look better in JSON. Or, okay, I take that back because it's showing like verbose stuff. But see how, yeah, that's not, why is it not looking better? Where was I when I did that? Maybe it's when I did it out here. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. But I hit JSON somewhere and it looked a lot better. But basically in this table, what you care about is the host names. So I'm going to click in here one more time. Data. I guess it looks a little bit better this way. Well, actually, it looks a lot better this time. So I'm not sure what I just did, but this looks more like it does like on the standard output that we normally would see. So we have the host names. And the Containerlab actually creates an Etsy host file, and it creates a file that you can use to build an inventory for Ansible. So if you want to go the dynamic inventory route, you can do that. Since we're running this locally and it resolves the host names, you can just do your inventory based off of the names of the devices. So like if I take this right now and go into my command line, so I'm running, where to go over here? This is the VS Code that's running. And you can see that it looks like I'm going, to a local port here to access it, but I do have, I've typed a tunnel through here. So I'm running on port 3002 in my lab environment. So this is just like a private IP in my home lab. So that's why you see that like this. Or if you ran it as a container on your server side, then it would just be the IP address that server and the port that you're exposing, and you would just open that in your firewall D, and everything would work fine that way. So that's a different way you could do it. So what I have here are the local files. I have an Arista EVPN. That I don't have a workflow for it just now, but I do have the Cisco one. So these are all the folders. These are the playbooks that I have. And when we ran that workflow, the first one that we did was we go and do the prep, which is like run the commands to build that topology. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we reboot it and we push our configs. And then I'm running the facts playbook at the end of that. Or actually the reboot one right here is before. So I can kind of just step you through the playbooks real quick, and then I'll go back to the workflow. So in this first playbook, the prep, we'll open this one up. And basically, very straightforward. Because I'm talking to that server, that host, I'm running an AAP, so I'm on an execution environment. So I can either try to do all this from like updating the Git repository, like using the Ansible.scm module, or I can talk to it as an external server. So that's what I'm doing here. And that's why I have delegate to. So this is just the host name of the server that we're actually on. But when we run that playbook in AAP, we're on a container, which is the execution environment is running on execution node as a container. And the execution node happens to be the controller that's local. So everything's all, all in one VM deployment. And I'm doing, running these tasks against the server. So I'm running a command. So if I was just using the command of Containerlab, then I would run this command reconfigure would actually build that lab again. So I built that lab originally. And when you do it the first time, it's just Containerlab deploy. And what it wants to do is read in a YAML file that is the topology file for your lab. So that's what this is right here. So to find that one, I just have to open this up a bit more. And this is the topology file. So pretty straightforward. In the topology file, I have nodes. So I have one spine, two leaves. And then I have the config files that I want to load when appropriate to build that config, right? Because when we spin up that image, there's no configuration, and then we're adding the config into it. So you have a startup config, and then you can reconfigure it later with different configs. So you can kind of like build your lab in steps, right? Or apply them with Ansible playbooks and steps, so different configs that you may want to run, or you can just do it, ad hoc through Ansible modules. So that's what that is. And then the image is that image that I had to create using the VRNet lab. So to see the image, if I go into Docker images, right, here's the ones that I have available locally right now. So let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. And you'll notice I have this one that's for the Cat 9KV. It doesn't make it any smaller, right? Because it's a container. It's still like the same footprint that it was originally. And then this CEOS is an Arista image that is already a container, right? And even that one's kind of larger too, so it's 2.4 gigs. So for this one, I had to download this from Arista, and then I renamed it because I think the naming was a little bit different for this image. So I renamed it so that it would be good, consistent with the Containerlab stuff. And then we tag the version. So, obviously we can run different versions if we want to. So we tag the version into it. And some of these other ones are different things that I was running. Like this is one that is for the VS Code if you want to run it as a container. But right now I'm not running it that way. I just have like a local install. And this SR Linux is just one of the ones that you can have available to you from Containerlab. It'll just pull it down and it just gives you like a box to test from. A very simple deployment of Linux. So that's what these images are, and they're available for the Containerlab. So if they're there, then we're able to spin up those nodes, and then ultimately we can add whatever configs we want into them, and then layer configs afterwards. If you layer configs afterwards, there's also a command to save them. So like when I'm running pushing configs, if I do that from Ansible, and then if I want to make that the new startup config, I can save them. And then the next time it'll incorporate them from the configuration file. So it kind of like imports and exports the configs in and out. Sort of reminds me of like CML from Cisco or what was viral. You can do that too, so you can save your configs. And then the really cool part about this is that you can create links between them, and it's real easy. You just say, what node and what port, and then it's going to stitch them together over the container network that they're using. And very simple and straightforward in that regard. And then on the screen, it'll tell you, that's what that table was. It just gives you an output of what everything is. So that's the basics of the actual one that was the prep. And then the reboot one, that was more because of the Catalyst 9KVs. Because of the, and I have to like activate a license or whatever. So I had to do like a two-step thing and reboot. So here I just took advantage of the ability to interact with prompts. And then one of the things about prompts is that sometimes that connection still stays there until it times out in Ansible. So you can reset it on the next task if you want to immediately reset it. So it'll close that out. And, so the box is just rebooting. And then when we pick it back up in that workflow with the push config node, or like the next step in that workflow, then that one we were going to push some configurations. So what I noticed is I was doing wait for, and I was trying different things, but this seemed to work a little bit better. Where if I waited 4 minutes was about almost exact every time, so I just kept it this way. So it would be a little bit quicker when it came back to to like wait for the reboot and then push the config. So you could do wait for, and this is pause. It's just, two different ways. You have more conditions with the wait for, because I can do like an SSH and wait for the state to have an active connection, things like that. But you want to do something, right? Because you don't want to just push the config because the box might not be ready yet. And once it is ready, then you push the configuration, and it's just based off of the name and the inventory, and it'll provide that startup config that it's going to push into each one of those two leafs in the one spine, and then that's where it'll have the BGP. If you run this step earlier, then it won't apply them because it doesn't have the licensing, so it'll ignore like the BGP configs and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we're doing it a little bit further along. And after that was the fax. So here I'm just looking at, this would just be the default, right? So that's kind of like show ver level of Ansible fax for network fax. And then these are from the resource module. So I just wanted to see the BGP configuration come back. So that should all be good and done for a while now. So let's go back and hopefully everything's good in the workflow. So I'll exit this out. We'll go back to jobs, and then we go into the workflow, and this last one over here, right, was the fax. So to make this smaller, you can scroll it down a little bit. So we looked at the output from this one. I don't think we did the second one yet. So we click in here, and here's the rebooting, right? So it reboots each one of them. So just clicking into that output or data part of it, right? So it's just representing those prompts. And that's one powerful thing about Ansible is like anything that has a prompt, that you can automate it very easy and respond to those prompts. So effectively, you can automate just about anything, right, that you can manually configure from a command line, because there's no limit, because we can respond to prompts. So let's refresh our session. And then the next thing was the pushing. So go back into the workflow, and that's this one. All right, so we waited for the connection in this, and then we push our configs. All right, so here's the actual output, and this is again the YAML, or I can make it JSON. So this one kind of looks the same because we're just pushing an entire config. All right, so it's able to push all these configs. The ones that it would have had a problem if we didn't do the reboot to activate would be the BGP or any of the EVPN stuff, so the route targets and all that stuff. They wouldn't work yet. So since we have it activated, we can push that entire config. And then kind of like as a validation step, we can see that in the fax. So the last one was the fax right here. I can click on it directly, right, because each one of them that runs a job template, right? So we have a workflow, and then each one of these is a job template. Or it could be one of the other capabilities. It could be like an approval node. It could be refreshing your inventory, syncing your inventory, syncing the project, so that way you might have like pushed some information and now you want to pull it back down like in the middle of your workflow, so you could glean some logic and then apply it like to a step like further down in the workflow. Or we could have these are all on success. We could create on failure connections as well, and you can have multiple connections because you have parallelism. You could actually have different work streams start at the same time. So there's a lot you can do with the workflow. So this is very simple in the sense that it's just, very linear, one after the other. It either works or it fails. And then if it fails, it would stop the workflow in this example. So this last one is kind of like a validation just so we can see what we've got in here. So we'll see this one. And you can see like in the, when we go into the Ansible fax, the first one is the network resources. So the BGP global configs, and then we have the address family configs, and then beneath that would be like the show ver equivalent. So this is like the default fax that you get back if you don't explicitly create like another subset. And then it would do that for each, so if we look at the spine, let's see what's in there. Right, so now we have a functioning EVPN. So what I'm going to do with this, like moving forward, is I'm going to start layering on like tenants and things, or maybe like decommissioning stuff, and I can all do that in workflows, and then I can save my lab like at different points. So I could take snapshots of like, here's kind of like the initial config, and then here's sort of like a config that's like halfway configured, and like here's the full config. And then I could always, use those to point to those files depending on what I want to build in the lab. So that's why it's like a really cool tool for like recreating things. I could save those configs in my repository in different branches. So maybe like something that we had an issue in production, I can go back and recreate it, by pulling from that branch that has very specific config files from that point in time. So there's a lot that you can do in that regard. And since everything's containers, it's easy to spin these things up so it becomes very disposable, and immutable in that way. So so that's like where I'm going with this. And maybe if anyone's interested, I might have like a more advanced one of these later as I'm learning and get some more things to work with it. But one other thing I did figure out, and there's a couple different approaches for this, is the diagrams. So if I go like into the command line, right? So back in the command line, let's see, where am I at in here? So I want to go to where that topology file is. So that would be the CLAB, right? So I'm in container Ansible, and then Cisco EVPN, right? And then this one, this is where that topology file is. So you either create a path to it or change directories to it. But if I have access to that topology file, then I can do the ContainerLab graph, and this will actually spin up like a local server, and it'll create a diagram for me. But it does require like a port, so I had to open up that port that it uses. It's like a 50,000 something port, so I had to do that in my firewall D. But this is like one approach. Like if you just want to run it and see it, directly from the command line, sudo. So I need to log in. Oh, wrong password. All right. So if I just do this port, I can just do it this way. So that's not going to work because it's running on that other server. So I need to be on that server. So I either go to the console, or I think since I opened this port already, I'm pretty sure I did. It's 192, 229, 229. I think that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Now the default, it's kind of like not in any particular order, but this is really like what we have here. All right. So that's one way of doing like a very simple diagram. If you want a diagram like this, but you want to edit and modify it, it'll do a Drawio diagram for you. And then you can open that in your VS Code, and there's an extension for that, and you can add whatever you want into that diagram. So that's another cool capability. The simplest one is just that graph is, where it just does a simple diagram for you too, that you can actually see that in like your repository, or just click on it from VS Code and bring it up. So that's where I created a playbook to do that one. So if I go back to here and go into my job templates, and it's this graph one right here, it will build it. It should show up. I think I have it just in the playbook directory. Okay. Oh, there it is. This PNG file. Right. So just a simple basic one, but you can mess with the dot files and make them a little bit more advanced. But basically, it's just taking, like in that playbook, I'm just taking the dot file, and then I'm running some commands to put it together. So if I go into this one here, I'm doing ContainerLab graph. If you just do that command, then that's where it built that server that we went to. But if you do the arguments, you can do a dot file. So that's what I did, and then I make it available, as a PNG, like to read into PNG file, and then we saved it into this directory. Right. So just real basic Ansible stuff to like move the file where I wanted, and things like that from this line here, from the command line. Right. So just where I want to save that PNG file. So pretty straightforward. And the other one was the Drawio. So if I get out of this, or dash dash. Let me do it. Help. I forget how they have that in there. It's towards the top, I think. Oh, it's just Drawio. Okay. So that one went here. I think I already have the extension in my VS Code where it should open it up. Yeah, and see how like you can modify it. You need to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. But it's kind of like a starter file. Then you can go ahead and edit these. The lines are there. They're just like not using like why didn't it should be like a black line or something so you can see it. But you can take these and then you can edit them and then save them. So it's like an easy way to start, a Drawio directly from your VS Code. And then as you're adding and changing these topologies, then that will be reflected in like your diagrams and your like topology PNG files and all that stuff. So you'll have those updated as you run that playbook. And you could just add that job template like to the workflow. Like so at the end of the workflow, go ahead and update whatever type of diagram that you want from the 3 choices. And you could do that as code. So that's pretty nice. So there's a lot of other capabilities in Containerlab that I haven't learned yet too. So I'll definitely circle back on some of those as well. So that's pretty much what I have.